All right, and we're back with another episode of We Good. It's the virtual town hall series hosted by the African American Leadership Forum. My name is Brittany L. Wright, and I am back for the first time in 2021. Special shout outs to our producer, Stan, who filled in for me during the last town hall. Stan, we appreciate you and everyone on the production team. Thank you for everything that you do to make this town hall possible. Before we get started and I introduce today's panelists, I want to give a special thank you to ALF's sponsors, which include the Minneapolis Foundation, North Point Health and Wellness, and Children's Minnesota for making this town hall possible. And of course, our partner organizations who also play a critical role in bringing this town hall to you every 2 weeks. Those partners include North Point Health and Wellness, Children's Minnesota, Insight News, the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder, and Minnesota Community Care. My name is Brittany L. Wright with Insight News, and on today's panel, I am joined by my esteemed group of colleagues. Up first, we have Ms. Adriene Thornton, who is the nurse and infection preventionist at Children's Minnesota. Adriene, welcome back, and I owe you a happy belated Founders Day. Great to
Thank you.
see
I will take that.
you. Also joining us is Brett Buckner, who is the managing director at oneminnesota.org. Brett, welcome back and happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
How are you celebrating today?
By joining you fine people.
I mean,
right
this
now.
is the celebration.
This is it. This is it. So no, thank you everybody, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, we're glad to have you. Also joining us is my big brother, Mr. Nick Muhammed, who is the executive director of the Black Civic Network. Welcome to the town hall.
Welcome. Thank you all for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Great to have you here. Joining us for the first time is Kareem Murphy, who is the Director of Intergovernmental Relations for Hennepin County. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Glad to have you. And last but certainly not least, we have Risikat Adesaogun. Did I say that right?
Adesaogun, thank you.
Adesaogun, I was so close. I swear I had it. Well, Risikat is brilliant. We had a chance to talk during the production meeting for our town hall. She is the press secretary and deputy of communications for the Office of Minnesota for the Secretary of State. And welcome to the town hall.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm glad to have all of you here. We have a lot to get into, so I'm not going to go ahead and delay any further. Today on the town hall, we are talking all things COVID-19 following the insurrection and the attacks on our nation's democracy. We are recapping the historic inauguration that just took place 7 days ago and really trying to look forward and to say what's going to happen in America with our new leadership. What does this mean for democracy and civic engagement moving forward, given we've had all of these unique and unprecedented events? And of course, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. This is a town hall that was rooted in COVID-19 and the Black community's response to that. So we're going to get into everything. But up first, let's talk about the insurrection. Something that I thought was really interesting is that there have been a lot of arrests. I shouldn't say a lot. There have been a few arrests, many people released, and of course, many who have gone unnamed in terms of those who chose to storm the Capitol on January 6th. One of those people was Emmanuel Jackson, who's a Black Trump supporter who was arrested after storming the Capitol, but who's being denied bail. Meanwhile, there are multiple white rioters who are released on bail. One of them was offered organic food before he was released. Many of them hold elected offices. And I want to start by asking Brett, is there ever going to be a time in our country where Black people and white people will be held to the same standards as it relates to our justice system?
Short answer is no. Even if you elected, all Black elected officials, all Black judges, etc. Problem is that your policies have not changed, and that's the governing manual. Until we actually start to understand that we're really all in this together, we will continue to have these outcomes, unfortunately. When you're watching it in real time and what's happening, and you see the mob that's going into the Capitol and the dry runs that took place, let's not forget about the dry runs that took place all summer. in Oregon and Michigan and other capitals, that you heard very little of arrest. And actually, the administrative law, and to have one individual, and there's probably a handful of others, in the place of DC, where it's mainly Black people, in the seat of our government, and seat of the democracy of where people across the globe are looking at it. It's unfortunately it's par for the course. So will we ever have it? No, because here's the other flip side to that, is that we expected that, and we kind of just swallowed it. As much as we are talking about it right now, the reality is that we have resigned ourselves to the fact that that is going to be the case for quite some time. So it's not going to change, and that's the unfortunate, my unfortunate assessment on that one.
All right. Well, if it's not going to change, what then happens to us as Black people, seeing that we're held to a higher standard?
That's always going to be the big challenge. When do we absolutely believe collectively that we deserve it? I hear it too many times, and from community leaders and community people and everything else, that it's always that inch of doubt, just enough to be able to push people off of what they know is the right thing. There was a guy who rioted with all that stuff, who was just fed up and everything else. That's where he thought his power was going to come from. So when you resign, the question for us is, when do we really demand the change? I wish I had a better answer for us that was a little bit more inspirational at this question, because I have.
We started off real heavy.
It's what happens.
It's the truth.
We have to start to keep it real first, but then we have to work real hard to change it. And that's going to be uncomfortable. That's going to be some sacrifice. That's going to be challenging. It's going to be calling people out that, you would say as friends at times. And until we absolutely see our collective success within ourselves, Black people ourselves, working with other communities of color, just everybody, till that happens. And then understand, let's just keep this 200 on this one. White supremacy is in every inch of our DNA. It's in us. It's in them. And it's that whole thing of, why am I going to give up power? Why am I going to give up power is their question. I'm going to fight tooth and nail. These people broke the law. You have now at least enough senators who have said, you know what? Boys will be boys. And that's it. So the question is how do we start to tell a better story, to start winning elections, start moving the seats, and start making things happen from there? But until that time, we're going to continue to have this discussion, which I know that people, quite honestly, just get tired of and kind of slink off to the side. We have to find a better way of actually energizing and mobilizing from that standpoint. But that's a major change of our DNA. That's it.
Well, let me ask Nick, is it in our DNA to storm the Capitol? And if we did that, what would be the response?
Well, I think history's shown us we ain't even got to storm the Capitol. We could be walking around Walmart. We could be going to buy Skittles and iced tea. Unfortunately, we know what the response is. For me, it should be a wake-up call to us. I think that you teach people how to treat you. And for a long time, we've been trying to build bridges with people who only want to burn them. And so my philosophy is very simple. If we can't change them, we change ourselves in the way that we orientate to them. We've for far too long been trying to get along with absolutely no results because there's no demand placed upon these particular people, progressive or conservative. White folks is white folks, as I like to say. I'm from Mississippi. And the reality is they only do what is comfortable for them to do, and it can't cost them anything. Now, if, Fannie Lou Hamer and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King knew this back in the 60s, and we're still here today in 2021, negotiating with a group of people who only want to do what they can do to keep themselves comfortable, that's a us problem. That's, we're looking at something that is the result of privilege. We know it's privilege. And the reality is the brother that got locked up, that was a wake up call for him. You're not a part of this club in the way that you think you're a part of this club. No organic food for you. You're going to take this cot and we're going to charge you, and there's not going to be any presidential pardon. And the reality is we have to take a long, hard look at our community and how we orientate with these groups as a whole. We're only going to get what we organize to demand. And I think frankly, our demands have been too small. Literally, we built the country. We don't act like we built the country. And that history and that lineage is something that has not been respected. If it was, we wouldn't be treated the way they were being treated. And one of the underlining factors there is just the sense of entitlement. We know what would have happened if it was us. We know that the story would have been ran longer than it's been ran now. We know that the entire background, family connections, job, everything that was connected to us would have been ran over, every major airwave, period. And that's simply a part of the privilege that we're dealing with. So in my opinion, we have to change the way that we orientate to white America. Right now, we have a president that has the Congress and the Senate. Now's the time for us to make the boldest demands that we can for our community and our concessions. Why? Because we've earned it. It is a fact that Black America contributed greatly to them having that particular seat. And I'll digress from that point right now because I know we got a lot to discuss, but in my opinion, it's time for us to change the way that we deal with everybody. It's time for everybody to pay up. We've extended credit and everybody has, overextended and they're beyond their credit limit. And we got to begin to bring some of that in, and we have to start cashing in some of that political, social, and economic capital.
Beyond their credit limit. I heard that. I got a little triggered. I thought, the first time I've ever heard it in that context, but I like that. I appreciate that. I want to ask Kareem, some of these rioters and some of the supporters of those who rioted are elected officials. So what does this mean for this moment in our nation's history, our democracy? What is the appropriate punishment for being complicit in something like this? And where do we go from here?
I'll say everyone who participated in that rebellion, that insurrection, needs to be punished to the maximum extent of the law. I think that's without qualification. I'll be frank, in the back of my mind, I just say punish them as if they were little Black boys. And if that's the standard we have, then making sure it applies to people who willingly, knowingly, with malice aforethought and with encouragement from the former president, rebelled against the United States government. I mean, it's if you listen to, I should say, much of the political narrative I have, really grounds itself in the, what's the animus? The animus is, it's around Black voting behavior. It's access to the ballot. It's people who have historically, at least in the historical imagination, been denied full citizenship, fully participating and winning. So it's bad enough that there's full participation, but participating and winning, and defeating a president who very clearly in voice and deed opposed Black and brown people exercising all of the rights and privileges of citizenship. And so, there's you broke the law, you rebelled against the government. you need to pay a price. You need to pay the maximum price. And if a Black mother can serve time for trying to get her child educated, then certainly somebody rebelling against even one person voting certainly deserves to face the maximum penalty of law. I was grateful to see elected officials who participated in there also facing arrest, punishment, presumed charges. I don't think anybody, without qualification, I should say, should be exempt from any of that. There's no entitlement. I would not even say that it's even more problematic for an elected official to do that. It's problematic for anybody to do that, regardless of, their age or their level of public service, or their having stood for a vote for any or appointment for any type of governmental office. This is just unacceptable. And when you start asking the questions of the why, one, I'll just say it's interesting that we're asking I should say that media sources are asking the question of why, like, why did people do this? Because we don't, there's the, when we had a Black Lives Matter demonstration on that extended to those very grounds. And for full transparency, I had a career in Washington, D.C. I lived there for 23 years. My husband actually worked for Steny Hoyer and worked in the Capitol and worked in some of those suites that were ransacked. So and I have friends that were actually in the chamber when they were raided. So it is personally and professionally it really hit home. Those are grounds that I worked, walked, and we all own. And so, when we look at an insurrection, it's just about the full free expression of our ability to vote. It is morally reprehensible. And I find it, the polite way to say is, I think it's problematic for anybody to say that anybody who participated in that does not deserve prosecution to the fullest extent of the law.
Well said. It absolutely is personal. And there's a stark contrast from the BLM protest, that were happening, where we are fighting to say, stop killing us. We want to be able to live and to do so freely, as other citizens have the right to do, versus people being mad because they lost an election, or they believe that an election was stolen or taken, which is primarily fed through misinformation. It has been proven and fact-checked on multiple occasions through multiple sources that, in fact, the election was valid. And despite that, there are still people, elected officials included, even some in the state of Minnesota, who we'll get to them in a little bit, who insist that the election was stolen. And so through the words and the bigotry of past President Donald Trump, his supporters were emboldened to attack our nation's capital and to attack our nation's democracy. And we are seeing a clear double standard in the way in which this matter is being addressed. And I want to hear from Risikat, who it was also personal for you. Your job was under siege in some ways. You work at the state capitol here in Minnesota, but there was a threat of security for you and people trying to stop the electoral college votes from being counted or to overturn them, or whatever their intention was. It put a heightened level of security on the Capitol and on the place that you go to work in every day, or at least that you did prior to the pandemic, and that you still have to go into for certain things. So what was that like to you to realize that there were these heightened threats of violence, especially as a Black woman in your workplace?
Thank you, Brittany. Yes, so one thing that many people found out later in the day on January 6th was, while we were all staring at our TVs and our phones, watching all of this stuff happen in DC, there were somewhere around 300 to 500 protesters right here in Minnesota who rallied at the Capitol and then marched to the governor's mansion. And while it was nothing like what we saw in DC, it really drives home the point that all politics are local. And when you have leaders getting up on the podium and talking about how the election in Minnesota is unlawful or illegal or rigged, is it really any wonder that people will want to take up arms ready for, a fight against these imagined perpetrators? And, oh, sorry, turn that phone over. And, one thing that really disturbs me, especially as we're moving into February, we've passed the inauguration, is that local and national media has kind of put this all to bed. And I think that there really can be no moving forward without a reckoning. There can be no unity without accountability. There has to be radical truth telling, because right now people think, well, there's only a couple of leaders who believe this conspiracy theory, who's listening to them. But the reality is we're in the midst of a legislative session right now, and the person who wants to push conspiracy theories and lies, those are some of the same people who sit on committees that impact policy that affect people's everyday lives right here in Minnesota. Because the one person who's interested in elections over here, or this other person who has doubts that, without any sort of credible evidence, without any sort of standing, when we've seen all of these allegations fall apart in court every single time, those are some of the same people who might be sitting on committees that oversee the ways in which we mete out healthcare for communities, or policing, or education. And so there really is no moving forward for us without coming to a common understanding of what the truth is, and demanding that everybody get on that same page before we go anywhere and before we do anything, because we can't leave this behind, even if the news cycle is over.
Very well said. And it is absolutely disheartening and deeply concerning that we can just move past this as if it didn't happen. And so I'm thankful to the producers here on the virtual town hall who said, yeah, we should probably have another town hall to address this. Yes, there are a lot of other things that happened, but let's be clear, this still happened, and some of them got arrested, but many of them didn't, and they also didn't get away with this because this was some like top flight, secret mission. We saw a video of police officers allowing them to walk in. So technically they stormed the Capitol, but really they walked in. They were escorted in, So there's a lot of people that are complicit that went to bed that night and woke up and put back on their uniforms and went back into the schools that they teach at and the hospitals that they work in. And the mindset and the ideology that caused them to act in the first place still exist. That doesn't get arrested. That doesn't get penalized. So we're still here in this moment. I want to ask Adriene, with all of the threats on our nation's capital, and specifically here in the state of Minnesota, we were one of the states that had a significant amount of threats and targets. Do you feel less safe in 2021 than you did before?
Well, first of all, people should realize that I have a little bit of a different perspective, because even though I've been in Minnesota for over 20 years, I was born and raised and started my adult life in Georgia. And so I grew up through, the Southern Ku Klux Klan rallies. I've told the story of how, my mother made me get on the floor in the car when we were driving to my aunt's house, because we had to drive through a Klan in this little itty bitty town to get there, and then being mischievous and looking up and seeing those hoods banging on our car and just being afraid for my life. And so that is the perspective that I come from. And so I moved up here to Minnesota because, in spite of the Minnesota nice that I experienced when I first got up here, it inherently, to me, felt safer than Georgia. And that was because they were trying to do the right thing. I went through St. Paul and they had up banners that said racism isn't welcome here. And I thought, well, if they're going to call it what it is and just put it out there, this is where I need to be. Now, with that said, since 45 took over years ago, it's felt different in Minnesota. I live in Rosemont, and I have always been well aware that many of my neighbors are Republicans and that they supported him. But to see the change in my neighbors that, we just kind of agreed to disagree in the past, and then there was this change in their whole being, that did make me feel unsafe. I have never felt as unsafe in Minnesota as I have the last few months. And so, to the point that my daughter, who is a college student, she goes to school at Iowa State. And, she's a pretty hefty girl. She's not tiny. And she used to be an athlete, so she's pretty strong. And so, of course, being young, she has this, I can conquer anything and anybody attitude. And I'm like, well, not until after inauguration. And so I made her stay here with me because when she was home and the insurrection happened, I couldn't sleep. And I thought, if something happens to her, I can't get to her to protect her. I can't get to her to save her. And going, from Minnesota to Iowa, you're going straight down 35. And I'm well aware that that is where a lot of Trump supporters reside. And so I made her come home and stay home until after the inauguration. I'm like, you have to be in this house with me because I can't protect you if you're somewhere else. And I won't sleep if you're not here. And she didn't get it. I don't think she still doesn't get it to this day. She's back at college now because she left the next day. She woke up at 7:00 the day after inauguration and she said, well, I think it's safe for me to travel now, Mom, so I'm leaving. And so, what do? She's 21, she thinks she can conquer the world, but it does feel unsafe. And it's an unnerving feeling, because about a year ago, I put into place all of these contingency plans. And this is more of my Georgia background coming in. But I'm like, you know what? These people are crazy. They are planning all kinds of stuff. And I'm very familiar with how the Klan operates when they start planning. And so I had to reach out to my true friends and say, hey, you have a basement without windows. So if something starts to happen, the kids and I are going to need to come to your house and hide in your basement. And I had a contingency plan for what do I do in Rosemont? How do I get out of Rosemont to get closer to the airport so we can get on the airplane and get out of here and go home to our family? And so people are like, well, why do you have those contingency plans? And I'm like, because I have been caught in these situations before. I would not be caught without having a plan because it is too unsafe. And especially in Rosemont, there are a lot of people who didn't support Trump, but there were an awful lot of people who did. They made it clear, you'd be driving to Target and this unending, nerve-ending road rage would come out of nowhere, and it's all because you're Black and they don't like you. And so I have felt more unsafe in the last year than I have, in all of my life. And it's just sad. It shouldn't come to that, but it did. I have no control over that. What I have control over is what I do to deal with it and how I manage my family and our situation. And for me, it's always being prepared for the worst, so I'm feeling much safer now since the inauguration. I actually like opening up my blinds now and I feel safe walking down the street again. So it just, the inauguration just brought a whole different feel to the world. So I do feel a little bit safer, still on guard, but I feel safer now.
Risikat, were you going to say something?
Just enthusiastic agreement.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that these contingency plans have to be made. I actually was supposed to be in DC for the inauguration. I was going to take my daughter. I have a 2-year-old little girl. We've got family in DC. It was Martin Luther King Day weekend. It was Founders Day weekend for Adriene sorority, my sorority. So there was so much Black history happening, and it was going to be like our moment, and me being able to show my baby with my sisters, sorority sisters, and my real sisters, and stepmom, like, look at this thing that's happening, like, look at this Black woman, you can do that. And that was taken from us. You know, I made the plan, and literally the next day they stormed the Capitol, and I said, you know what? I'm not going to DC. I'm not taking my baby there. And it's unfortunate that we have to have um, our celebrations taken from us. It's unfortunate that we couldn't all be on the lawn during inauguration. It is unfortunate that we have to have these contingency plans and to think this way. It's in many ways like another form of PTSD, even when we're in our homes, that feeling of unsafety. You know, something that my dad said to me is, you can run everywhere you want to in the world, but you will not run from this home. You know, and he was very adamant that, like, let somebody come up into this house, and we'll see what happens. But it's unfortunate that we're even having to have these conversations with our families. And also, I'm thankful that you're having these conversations with your daughter. I'm thankful that I was able to shift my own plans. I want to pivot for a moment before I go back to answering questions. I see Ruben Moore. Shout out to Ruben, my frat brother. He's also a community partner with Minnesota Community Care. He's in the comments, and I see something from him that I'd like to share with the rest of the audience. He says, my sister was murdered in a hit and run during a Trump rally last year in Tulsa, Oklahoma. There was no accountability, help, and no one arrested. How do we reconcile the accountability, hypocrisy afforded to the dominant colonial group of European immigrants while being held accountable for everything else as people of color? Uh, Nick, Brett, anyone, would you like to respond to that?
Uh, I have a very unconventional perspective when it comes to that. I also was born in the South. And one thing in the South that doesn't often get talked about when it comes to some of our community is that, you know, we are very peaceful people. However, we are also very prepared people. There are lines that are drawn. I don't believe that we need to continue to push a rhetoric where Black people remain defenseless. I also believe that we have a Second Amendment for a reason, and we have to come out of the notion that we don't need that Second Amendment. If it was good enough to be put into the foundation of this country, we would be very naive to believe that we don't need to exercise that right. Those of us who are well within that constitutional right to make sure that we're at least prepared to defend, you know, our homes and our families. That's a critical um, right that we very rarely talk about, we very rarely exercise, because a lot of our political alliances are built on this weird dynamic that encourage us to stay defenseless. And the reality is it has not fared well for us. I'll even go as far as to say that, you know, in terms of bullying, a bully only goes where they know people are vulnerable. That's a fact. So if more of our communities exercise the rights and, you know, organize within ourselves and our communities and our neighbors to say, hey, you know, and this is not just Black to Black. If you have real progressive friends and families and look, hey, if we all live in the same neighborhood, here's what we agree as a community. And here's how we're going to defend each other as a community. Here's how we're going to resource to make sure that we're properly trained and understand what to do just in case, you know, the stupidity finds itself in our neighborhood, you know, or on our block. And that's just a reality that we have to begin to deal with. And that's where I'm at with it. The notion that certain groups and sectors of the country are going to learn their way, or we're going to be compassionate to them in a way that's going to somehow change their mind state. For me, I haven't seen that pan out. But I do know that when a bully knows that it's not a cakewalk, they tend to walk a little bit differently or not approach you at all.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And because again, what you saw on this six, it's just basically organized bullying, period. It was a temper tantrum to start the process. Let's keep this real. That was a temper tantrum. I lost. Wah, wah, wah. And the reality is, I'm going to show you now. And that, you know, systematically, again, If you understand how you can pull the levers and everything else, the fact that the DC Guard was not allowed to actually defend the Capitol in the space. I mean, that was actually proven out now, that you didn't have the proper preparation across the board, that even at the highest level of the Capitol Police, you know, I'm pretty sure will be found later on that that left the Capitol, you know, not in its best defense situation. But going back to what Ruben's saying, Ruben, my deepest condolences, man. Even here, didn't know about that situation is, you know, until we start to see our humanity in ourselves, because that story was written in 2020, 1960, 1940, 1920. We still have not been um, allowed to be seen as human. We're entertainers, we're orators, we're this, we're that, we are all things, but that piece of humanity that is sucked away based on that original relationship of slavery all that years ago has still been a part of that whole DNA. So the question is, I mean, even before the truth, the reality is that can we see each other for who we are, human beings, and that we have greater challenges that are going on across our globe. The fact that we are, it tells you everything that in the face of a pandemic, a public health crisis unseen at any time, that we still are trying to figure out who gets vaccine, what, and everything else. One, first of all, let's get a plan together to actually produce the proper pieces, and then try to say, that all human life is valuable. So when you're dealing with individuals, and it's not everybody, hell, it's not even everybody to the right. You know, I don't condemn everybody, but they got a heck of a group that they can draw from. 74 million people double down on trying to go back through this. But it's a great handful of those individuals that refuse to see humanity amongst their people, their peers, and that they know that they're on their last legs. That's the biggest thing that we have to remember. If there's a bit of hope on this, they know that they're on the last legs. The demographics, the numbers, and quite honestly, people are just fed up. Now the question is what's the agreements from this point on? Because what we don't do is actually ask for the right share. We always discount ourselves at 40% of what needs to take place. We start with that, as opposed to even saying, this is the cost and this is the standard and that's it. That's where we're going. So until we start to see that our lives matter just as much and truly believe it, and not necessarily we go out in the streets one day and then all of a sudden next day, yeah, we're good, you know, until the next situation. That is consistent, is constant, is actually strategic and moves on from there. That's what's going to have to change in order to make sure that Ruben's sister is, and everybody else who has been killed, murdered straight out, is going to have to take place.
Absolutely. Ruben, I want to give my condolences and to say thank you for sharing. It is us being willing to share our truth and to talk about the things in which we experience and how we are so deeply impacted by what's happening, that we move forward in not just having the conversations, but really bringing about change. So when people say, oh, it's just political and I'm not into politics, it's bigger than that, and it's costing people their lives. Nick Muhammed talked about having a strong defense in us as a community, not being afraid to do that. I, for the first time ever, went and got my conceal and carry permit over the summer. And I've talked about it on this show a little bit. My family has been deeply affected by gun violence. I never wanted to be that person to have to own a gun or to be in that position. But what I saw this summer, this is pre-insurrection, what I saw happening in response to the murder of George Floyd, us again saying, stop killing us. We deserve to live and to be treated equally and to live and to have freedom. the response that I saw here in the Twin Cities and the white supremacists that came here and tormented our communities, that told me everything that I needed to know about where we were headed and just how emboldened people felt under this administration and how powerless they were beginning to feel. And when people who are used to being in control, people who are used to being able to manipulate systems in their favor and to use their power and their privilege, slowly start to lose their grasp on the thing or the group of people that they once were able to control, they start to lash out and act out in ways. Brett said it perfectly. It's a temper tantrum. So I want to also say, in addition to a defense, having an exit strategy, preparing yourselves, the best defense is a strong offense. So us as Black people and as a community, loving on one another, connecting, talking to one another, sharing our pains and our grievances, as our brother Ruben just did, and also saying, hey, I got you. You know, because it's a much different conversation when you know somebody tries to roll up in your neighborhood and all 7 of your neighbors on your block are ready. It's a much different conversation, you
You
know?
know, it's funny that you bring that up, Brittany, because, again, I'm from Georgia and I grew up with a gun in the house. My father died when I was very young, when I was about 7. And so my mother had these 5 kids that she had to raise in Georgia. And she had a gun and she knew how to use it. And I just remember growing up thinking, oh, I'm never going to have a gun. I'm never going to get a gun. I don't want a gun. And I didn't get one. I was like, I'm not going to have a gun around my kids. And now, like you, I am in the process of getting my conceal and carry because I'm like, yeah, I'm not living in this house without a gun. I'm just, I have to be able to protect my children. But you know what? It is the world that changed my mind. I have tried to do it the other way. And I call it the other way because, growing up in Georgia and then you go to college and they, well, you have to do things the right way and whatever. And that's all well and good, but you still need to protect yourself. And so my mindset has totally changed. I've totally flipped. And my daughter, we have multiple conversations about this because, of course, she was born and raised in Minnesota and now goes to school in Iowa. And so her perspective is totally different from mine. And so I'm having to backtrack and do some re-education with her about her history because she doesn't get it. And I think that's a problem with a lot of our younger people is they don't know their history and therefore they don't get it. And so we have to continue to educate our kids, continue to have these hard conversations. It's wonderful to want to raise your kids in this wonderful society and protect them from all the bad stories and the badness that you experienced before, but the reality is things have not changed. I feel like we're in the matrix where the AI people have taken over and they've turned the world into this place that appears to be wonderful and good, but in reality it hasn't, and they are happy only when we do what they want us to do. And so we have to keep talking to our kids. We have to keep teaching them about our history and give them real stories, not just the stories they see in the books and, in the movies. That's well and good, but they need to hear real stories from us so they know these are truly things that we have all experienced as a people, and we have to prevent it going forward. But we can't do that unless they get it and they start to make changes as well.
Absolutely. I feel like we always talk about the miseducation of the Negro, right? I don't think we talk enough about the miseducation of white people and how they have been taught for generations that they are superior. And it's this insidious nature of white supremacy that has been passed down through generations. And it's inherent, it's embedded. As Brett said, it's even in us. And so we have to do this process to educate ourselves and to educate our children, educate our neighbors, and not to come from a place of judgment about what people don't know, or how they've chosen to react in the past, how they've chosen to vote in the past, but to come from a place of love and to say, this is where we are right now. So we can choose to be like every other media outlet and look past the fact that 21 days ago, a group of people stormed the Capitol, or we can acknowledge that there is a real threat on our democracy and that people in this country feel more emboldened than they have in a very long time. I won't say ever, because we've seen this before. Our grandparents have seen this before, but now we're living through it, even though we're in progressive times, right? And so I want to pivot to Risikat right now to help educate us and to dispel some of the myths that have been passed on that cause people to storm the Capitol and to act out some of these heinous and violent crimes. I know we've talked in our pre-production meeting about there being some misinformation that is still being shared, even by elected officials in the state of Minnesota. Are there any myths that you would like to dispel today so that we can educate our audience on what exactly is happening?
Thanks, Brittany. And yes, there are. Before I get into that, I would even back up and just offer an observation. And I, along with many people, we spent the past 4 years watching a slew of White House press secretaries get up onto the podium and lie, literally share falsehoods, very easily confirmable falsehoods. And it was one of the first times in my career that I saw the bold level of lies being propagated. And for me, it was sort of interesting because, as we know, every elected official has a responsibility to the people that they serve. We see them get sworn in, we see them put their hand up to take their oath, and generally we hold them accountable and we expect them to do certain things. But beyond that, there's a whole system of people around those elected officials. Everybody has a chief of staff, a press person, an advisor, and all of these people, we get together in a huddle, and that's when the decisions are made. And so for me, when you can see somebody get up onto a podium and lie, that's only what the public sees. My question is how are they advising people behind the doors? Because the public really can only get a very small percentage of information. We typically write press releases and things shooting for about a 5th grade level. And so we're just straight up doing highlights, headlines. And so that very small piece of the pie occludes so much other work. And if the root is rotten, anything that goes out will be rotten. And so when I think about what happened on January 6th, it makes a lot of sense, of course. People have found sly ways to stoke these fires of misinformation. And it's not even in the specific words that they use, but more so the method. Certainly people have said, oh, the election's illegal, it's unlawful. But what's more disturbing to me is the folks who try to shroud the misinformation and disinformation in by couching it with strategic language like, well, I just want to listen to both sides, or I'm just asking questions. Isn't it good to ask questions? We could always be a little bit better, right? And it makes those types of approaches make it really difficult to push back and say, no, our country has a good electoral system, and the improvements that need to be made tend to be the improvements that would make it easier for every eligible voter to vote. And especially people living in communities where they have low income, marginalized communities of color. Like, if there are improvements that need to be made, the improvements that need to be made are the ones that affect the most marginalized among us, and not things that are going to make it even harder. And so I think the enemy is sophisticated, and the whole point is to move the goalposts and to get people comfortable by making compromises over and over again. But the bottom line is there can't really be a compromise with the truth in any way. And I think it's going to be a really long time before people believe in the system again on either side, because There are people who there are people who believe an election was stolen from them and that their rightful leader was robbed. How do you reach those people? And at the same time, there's a segment of us who we watched a literal terrorist attack on our nation's capital. And I wouldn't call them rioters. I would call them domestic terrorists. And we're going to watch a whole lot of people go free and not face any consequences. How do we reconcile all of those things? And I don't think it's quite as simple as us just saying the truth. That's the first step, but there are many, many, many hundreds of steps after that. And we're struggling just to get this one first thing done.
We are, and the person who could be held responsible for all of this is President Donald Trump. Former President Donald Trump. It's good to say that. My first time being able to say that on this town hall. I am not even going to spend a whole lot of time discussing it, but I just will name that articles of impeachment have been put forth. He's been impeached again and could be held with criminal charges in the coming weeks. But of course, that's going to take a vote by, we need at least 17 Republicans to do so, and many have come forward saying that they're not necessarily willing to hold him accountable. So what we're likely going to see is history repeat itself, and a man who was complicit in a variety of crimes likely get off scot-free. We can talk more about that on a coming town hall. In the interest of time, I want to move forward to some positive things and to look forward and also to celebrate, right? Because there is some goodness in the world. I know for me, I was feeling very heavy and very down. And then Inauguration Day came. And seeing Kamala Harris, be sworn in, seeing Michelle Obama in her bang, perfectly swooped, in her power belt looking like a superwoman. Those were things that gave me joy. And it really reminded me that even though it seems like we have been set back so far, that there is incremental progress being made. And so I want to ask Adriene, what was the moment like for you? I already know you had on your Chucks and your pearls, and I already know. I don't even have to ask. I already know, but what was that moment on Inauguration Day like for you?
Well, first I want to start with my professional hat. I was so thrilled to see all the chairs were spaced out. Everyone had on a mask. They acted like we were in the middle of a pandemic. And as an infection preventionist who is absolutely tired of COVID and tired of fighting the COVID battle, that in itself just made me feel so good. I actually called my director and I said, are you looking at them? They actually get it and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And we were both so excited. So that's my nerd infection preventionist hat. I was really happy to see that happening. And in addition to that, just seeing the Black Girl Magic. Yeah. I watched it with my daughter because, I always want to instill in her that you can do whatever you want to do, and growing up, saying, oh, I want to be president of the United States, that was not in my vernacular. And now I'm like, well, you can do whatever you want to do, seeing the beauty, that was on the stage, seeing how they come together. Because we don't often see positive images of Black women, Black and brown women coming together, holding each other up, supporting each other. And I think seeing that on the stage for the world to see was absolutely wonderful. It was just so inspiring. And of course, the fashions were absolutely fabulous. Yeah. I just, and I think aside from the fashions being fabulous, the fact that most of them came from Black designers made it even more fabulous. And so there was all this excitement because my daughter, her major at Iowa State is fashion design and merchandising. And so, here we are on our phones and she's like, oh, Mom, Michelle Obama's wearing this designer, and here's his page. And I was like, wow, so it was just wonderful all around. And I honestly felt like a weight had been lifted off of my shoulders and my chest. I could breathe again. I had hope for the future again. Before it literally felt like, how you see in movies where, you have this wonderful king and then the bad king takes over and it turns dark outside and the trees all turn black and there are no leaves. And I honestly felt like we were living in that. And the inauguration washed away all of that. The leaves turned green again, even though it's winter in Minnesota. I saw green leaves outside. The sun came out again and it shone on all of us. And it was just wonderful. And Miss Amanda, man, I tell you, I was in tears. I was cheering. I was clapping. It was just wonderful all around. And I told my daughter, I said, there is hope for this country yet, and it's called young people. Mm-hmm. We are looking to you all. And I think that's the biggest difference now is that, when I was growing up as a teenager, you heard about politics, but you weren't really engaged. I know I wasn't. None of my friends were. But these young people are engaged. And so like I look at Risikat, and I don't know how old you are, but the first time I met you, I was like, oh my God, she's so young. This is so wonderful. It just makes me so proud, so it was just a wonderful experience. And I, when I'm having one of those moments, I just go back and watch Michelle and Miss Kamala, give each other love, and it just, brings me back up again. So yeah, I'm excited for the future. I'm excited to see what our young people are going to do, because I feel like they are going to change the world. Their mindsets are, a little different from ours. So I'm really excited. I'm like, I'm just going to sit back. I'm here if you need me. But you guys do what you need to do, and we got your back. So yeah, just feeling a lot better, able to sleep again, which is nice.
I have to second you on the young person thing. Of course, conducting an election in a pandemic is stressful and not ideal. And in Minnesota, it takes 30,000 people working as poll workers to pull off an election. 30,000 of them. That's how many it takes. And during this pandemic, especially when we were back in March and April, we were worried because most of the poll workers in Minnesota and probably nationwide tend to be older folks. It's overwhelmingly white, and we did a lot of recruiting all over the state, and we were really pleased because we saw a lot of young people step up. In Minnesota, you only have to be 16 to be a poll worker. And some counties will pay up to like $20 per hour. And so I'm always telling my friends who have younger siblings, hey, if you want to get into politics, this is a really low pressure, good entryway to learn about the system and demystify it, because it's scary to walk into a polling place for the first time if you don't really know what to expect or what to do. And it's always real quiet in there. People are thinking. And we also had a number of people from a variety of ethnic communities stepping up, which is great. There were so many Hmong poll workers stepping up, which is a dual benefit because, they might see an elder coming in who they're registered to vote, but maybe they just need a little bit of help in their own language. And hopefully the trend continues for future elections to get people really involved, because all it takes is one election, and then they tell people and they tell people, and that's how you do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, Kareem, what was your highlight?
So I keep talking about full transparency. I am a third generation Howard University graduate. So I rejoiced with all, and my mother pledged Alpha Kappa Alpha and Alpha Chapter at Howard University. She was spring of 1962. I just gotta let her own that and celebrate that. My husband and I met at Howard. My twin brother went there. I've got a very strong family connection. We could not have been any more happy, excited, and jubilant with Vice President Harris and that inauguration. But so just the symbol and the meaning of Blackness as part of this inauguration. I mean, I was there for both of Barack Obama's inaugurations, and that was a phenomenal experience to actually been physically present for that. And so to experience this not online but in a pandemic, it was a different high, and it was different because I think in many ways, and gets back to Adriene's talking about the fashion, what the visuals do is spark our imagination. It is the creativity. I mean, all of the memes that started out with Michelle Obama in that regal outfit designed by a queer Black man, and then she morphs into to Storm in some of the superhero things, and then it's Storm and Black Panther. And we actually went and read, like, there's a whole like genre about Storm and Black Panther and Wakandan. I mean, but I'm just talking about spark the idea of these Black bodies as superheroes, as things that inspire, as things that draw. In the midst of 4 years of anti-Black torment, we've got a moment of Black joy. It's a resetting, and it sparks that imagination. And I mean, it feeds into, we had the Black firefighter who did the pledge. It was our poet. I mean, just the artistry. It reminds us that this is our country. That is indigenous land stolen from indigenous persons and built by enslaved persons who were Black people who were enslaved, former Africans who were enslaved. Just the coming full circle and the centering of Black women in a political event, the seminal political event, in ways that I think are even inspiring. It was interesting for me to watch the MLK documentaries. They're now starting to tell a multi-gendered story of the civil rights movement. And so it's not just these charismatic Black clergy people. It was a universe of it was the full spectrum of the diaspora that was involved in this. These are the things that that spark our mind. Seeing that, thinking superheroes, civil rights, forward thinking. I mean, and yes, we do need to push Biden as far as our imaginations will let us. But looking how that maps into some of the announcements from this week, it is just phenomenal. It is fun. We are in a moment pregnant with possibilities, and it's up to us. It's up to America. It's up to Black and brown people to make sure we live into that vision and that inspiration. You can probably see me. I'm just getting excited because I'm just like,
I'm excited too.
I don't. We're in a new moment, and it's there's so much possibility, and I'm very excited about it.
So very well said. Brett, what was your takeaway?
The biggest thing is that democracy worked. We have to remember at the beginning of this whole process, the reason why we're at the inaugural is because transfer of power did take place peacefully. But the point that we're making is, even after that craziness that went down on the 6th, less than 2 weeks later, we still swore in a president, vice president, and moved the society forward at that point in time. You have to think about it, what would have happened in any other country in the world. That would not have happened. It would have still had the discord and everything else. So we still were able to overcome that it was passed off to two individuals, white man and black woman, that's going to actually move the agenda from this point on. And that you did see America. You did see a little bit of everything. And I'm Adriene, I'm right there with you. Yeah, they actually stayed with protocol and everything else. You did not see the mass of people in the Washington, because if it was a Trump, a celebration, that thing would have been packed out with all the craziness, and we would have had another super spreader and off to the races again. That's a whole nother discussion. But the fact that democracy was affirmed, even in places of Georgia and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan and all the places that you have, whatever. We certified, we moved on, and now we're going to move on as a collective. Like it or not, for those 74 million individuals that went another way, they know the game plan. Next 4 years, these individuals, that Georgia was reaffirmed. And again, we're going to be a little stalled up. People think that Democrats have control of the Senate. a guy named Joe Manchin has a different discussion on that one. The reality is that we have an ability to continue to move on. And I think the celebration at the 56th inaugural, 59th, I forget what the number was. The fact that we actually, no, 59th, the fact that we actually had one is a testament to who we are as a collective, in spite of our worst situation.
In spite of, absolutely. Kareem, I feel like you were going to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to, Brett, I'm with you, but I'm troubled because the language I've been using is that democracy prevailed barely. You know, on the 6th, it was not clear what the outcome was going to be. And if you look at behavior since then, I'm just saying the democracy prevailing is disputed, and the path the country took to produce the inauguration of Biden and Harris is a path that can be treacherous if we're not vigilant. It was the organizing that you know, Stacey Abrams and Tamika Atkins and Deborah Scott and so many other Black women did in Georgia to flip that state. There's a path, but they now know the plan. And that Georgia state legislature and governor have made a pledge to enhance voting restrictions. And so everything that worked is going to be disputed. And I am celebrating the victory. I just want to be, I'm using I language. I'm just careful when I say democracy prevailed, because it barely did. And I'm not sure that it can again because of what this may produce.
You know, I understand where you're coming from. The piece that I will always I just have to point out that it did. And as it did prevail, the biggest day that we had was January 6th. We had the insurrection, but then we still had the congressional members do their duty. Mm-hmm. And we have to remind ourselves across the board that it takes a little bit of everybody to do it. As Dr. Franklin said at the founding of the country, when asked the question, well, we have, Doc, you know, a democracy or I forget the whole piece, but basically it's a democracy if you can keep it. And the question is that piece, that inaugural, is a reaffirmation of this whole process. You know, again, as much as those 74 million individuals didn't like the outcome, you got to deal with it. And that we do see this big challenge between the two different ideas. And actually, I think what this reckoning is going to take place of what does this really mean to be America. At the beginning of this whole process, this has always been, I need to divide and conquer. But somehow, some way, even those election officials and those elected, those who were stewards of the process, did what they were supposed to do based on the agreement that we all came about. And they certified that whole piece, sent it to the DC area, and even in the face of the crazy mob, still certified that election. Even though it was a foregone conclusion, we knew what was going to happen. But the fact that it stood up, and I'll even give Pence a little bit of credit today, just a little bit, because it's called my birthday, so I gotta give something away, on this one. The reality is that Mike Pence, in the face of all that stuff, said, "Oh, we're gonna get back to work," and led the Congress ceremonially through its process. And I think that's where we really have to start to think about it. And I'm in awe. I was in awe that whole day. I did not go to sleep until almost the last count, because I was just waiting on the next. I got popcorn. I kept getting popcorn and saying, "What's next? This is ridiculous." But the fact is that in that 120, just under 24 hours, it kept going, and that was the amazing piece.
I don't know if I would go as far as to give Pence credit, but he did his job as people with jobs are supposed to do. So look at God. Nick, I want to hear from you. You've been really quiet. What are your thoughts on the inauguration and what's taken place since then?
I'll say this much. I'm always cautious based on history.
Mm-hmm.
I busted my tail during the Obama first electoral process, and I witnessed the euphoria of the symbol. During that administration, in his tenure, when we think about Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, the litany of Black men and women and children who were murdered, the ultimate answer was Blue Shield's, the Blue Shield policy that came out of that. We were not afforded any protection, even though we had a nice symbol in the White House. Even now, I'm not impressed with the symbolism, because white supremacy and the structure of white supremacy is in the bones. The bones of this country is the policy. What I need to see are what are the policy initiatives, changes, executive orders that are going to actually get down to the bones of the most affected community. I'll be impressed when the reality around Black people begins to change. That's what I'm looking for. Now, don't get me wrong. I like a celebration just like anybody else. I love when we are seeing ourselves in a positive light, because we don't get to see it enough. I love to see Black people affirmed. I love to see Black women affirmed and happy for a change on a public, national, and global stage. But I don't lose sight of the fact that beyond this day, there's work that needs to be done. The data is already in. We know how our community is faring. To this point, no one has delivered to the Black community a fraction of what we're actually due. And I'm not talking about, the association. I'm talking about, if you understand the bedrock history of this country, and if you look at what has been delivered to us, it's abysmal. As hard as we work, as much as we've poured into this particular party, in a percentile unheard of by any other group of color in this country, we're 90 and 80 percentile. Even our Latino brothers and sisters aren't 90 and 80%. They're 30, 40, and then a bunch of undecided at times. And that's normal across the board. Even white folks ain't 90 and 80% for either other party, and they the majority in the country. So for me, I'm waiting to see what the initiatives that are going to deliver to the most dedicated group in the Democratic Party. What are you going to materialize to show the real appreciation for the undying support of a group that has literally put everything on the line to get these people into office? However, when I'm looking at their track record, they have more to prove to us than we have to prove to them at this point. You have it. Now the question becomes, what are the tangibles? And the tangibles cannot be something that you sit alone and begin to decide with a select few. Our community has brilliant people that need to be involved in this process. And I need people to stop shying away from the realities of what Black America needs. Stop thinking small. I just watch people sit back and bury the conversation on reparations. And then when the pandemic comes across the table, they've materialized to date almost $6 trillion at a pen stroke. Yeah. Now, the reality is Black America has been sitting in pre-COVID conditions like we had COVID already. We were the contingencies to wealth and generational wealth. The realities of why that happened is very well known. We've had some brilliant Black men and women who published and educated as many people as they could reach. But the realities haven't changed because people aren't bold once we get into those seats of power to carry that narrative into policy. And that's what I'm looking forward to. This is a great, time. We won. And I also want to caution us on the idea that the racism only exists on one side. Some of the most racist policies came under Clinton that literally gutted our communities in ways we still have not recovered from. Even Clinton himself apologized for it, but where was the actual infrastructure and policy change to mend and repair the damage done? That has yet to materialize. In my estimation of it, it hasn't materialized because we haven't demanded it. We have, as Black people, a very giving heart, and we literally will push ourselves to the bottom of the deck and to the back of the line in the name of solidarity. I dare to say right now, if we have allies anywhere, they should be just as loud for the repair of the Black community as they are for any other issue that has been screamed at the top of their lungs. And for me, I'm not happy until I see these allies that we lock arms with us and try to repair the legacy that we've had to carry for the last 400 years. Because right now we're not in as good a spot as we think we are. The data is already out there. We're 228 years behind our white counterparts. That's if they stopped moving to wait for us. And we all know that's not going to happen. The reality is we're not in a great position as a whole. And that's what this seat is about, the whole of the country. I want that we to really mean we, which means we have to look at what happened to we from them being white America, Republican or Democrat. Where is your skin in the game? Let's finish the work. Let's not just get caught up in the symbolism without changing the bones. Racism is in the bones, and the bones is very much the policy. And that's where I'll leave it.
Absolutely. In the interest of time, I want to go around the table, virtual table, and ask all of you, what do you hope to see within this new administration? Let's move beyond the symbolism, as Nick said. What are you hoping, or what are you anticipating? Some things have already happened. You know, Biden has signed many executive orders. We've rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement, stopped Trump's border wall construction, ending the Muslim ban, deferring student loan payments through September, getting started on the process again to put Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill, which to some people may also be symbolism again. But regardless of what you may feel, I want to know, what are you hoping to get out of this administration? Brett, I'll start with you.
Well, just the reality that we can't succeed without each other across the board. First and foremost, take away the whole simple fact of what we call budget or how we finance this. That has been thrown out the window multiple times, but definitely, exhibited during the past several months. Cost is not the issue about what we need to do. The question is will. Are we willing to actually achieve what we're talking about, which goes back to control? Again, as we're talking about, and Nick's right, it's the whole thing of if it's within the bones, it's not about the finances, it's about the actual belief, the will, do I see my success in you? So what I hope to see is that President Biden and Vice President Harris and others, and again, Democratic Party is on one side of things, but you need X amount of votes from the other side based on the rules that are put in to have deliberative thought, deliberative action. So the unfortunate part is that until there's absolutely a demand, not just from us, a coherent response from us, it has to be a little bit of everybody to say, this is in our best interest. And we can talk about bottom line. If we correct these issues, our lives all get better, even the ones that were trying to storm the castle a couple weeks ago. So until those moments start to take place, until that dot is connected, until people start to think that if I give you X, that means it's taken out of my, that's not the case. That's not the case at all. The reality is that there's enough out here if we believe that my success is your success, as vice versa. So that's what I hope that takes place at this point.
Absolutely. Kareem, how about you? What are you looking forward to with this administration?
I'm going to take a different spin on this, and I hope I'm not betraying the intent of the question, but and it really is building on, I think, what I took from Nick's comments. What I want to see is a mobilizing and organizing of Black and brown voters like this country has never seen in its entire life. And I want that to represent this spectrum of interests of Black and brown people. And so I think that's the leverage for every specific policy and legislative ask that we can make. And that's a long-term investment in making sure that government represents our interests and functions with our interests at its center and at its core. So it is less about a policy. I mean, I could give you 10, 15 things that I'd love to see out the Biden-Harris administration. But what I'm more interested in is looking at what these Black women did in Georgia, dialing that up by a factor of 30, and making sure that that happens in every state, in every corner of the country.
Absolutely. Risikat, how about you?
Um, yes, like Kareem, I could give the laundry list, but I think my biggest wish, and before I say that, I'll say I firmly believe that there's not a single idea that really originates on Capitol Hill. All politics are local, and one thing that my office really works on is letting people know, yes, these general elections, super important, but as much as people didn't like Trump, there's a mini Trump on every school board, and there's one who's running for mayor in your city probably. Um, and I would really love to close the gap in general public consciousness so that folks stay on the pulse of all of these things, because we cannot afford to just tune in every 4 years when the ads start rolling. And to that end, I really hope and expect that the Biden administration will reach back to local communities, because we do originate, all of these great ideas. And we see so many hearings in which lawmakers are saying, "Oh, how could we possibly make this work? And how could we pay for this?" And people have already figured it out. People have already done the brainstorming, and there needs to be a firmer partnership and relationship between the people who eat, sleep, and breathe these policies and have done all of the in-depth thought. Because as Black folks, we don't really get to bow out. We're all tired, and it is stressful, and it's downright depressing, but it's a matter of our survival. We don't really have the luxury that other folks have of saying, "Oof, this is a lot. I'm just gonna chill for 6 months, and I'll hook back in when there's something interesting on Instagram." We just don't have the luxury to do that. And so while I do think we should engage in as much group care as possible, I really don't want people to lose sight of the fact that there's an election every single year for something. Township elections, school board elections, and the things that are going to have the biggest impact on our day-to-day life often are not things coming out of DC. Yeah, that's about it.
Yes, very well said. And we're definitely going to continue to dive into our local politics, as many of our local elected officials are now vying for re-election, and some new names are going to be popping up on ballots in the future. So the conversation will continue. Adriene, I want to ask you, Biden's got a plan to roll out somewhere around 150,000 vaccines within the first 100 days of his administration. How are you feeling about that?
Tired, because I know that means that I will go into hyper mode for helping to get vaccines out. Right now I am helping to manage the vaccine clinic at Children's Minnesota, and my director has a big heart, as does our CEO. And so if we let her have her way, she just open up the front doors and say, "Everybody come get vaccinated." And then expect me to figure it out. And that's fine, because I have a big heart too. But I am very encouraged, because at least the president recognizes that we need a plan. And so he's put a team back in place that was in place before, was removed by President Trump. And he's put, the smart people, the scientists, the people who do this every day, he's put them back in place. And so I'm very hopeful for the future. I think it's going to go fine. I think we'll get tons of people vaccinated in the first 100 days. It is going to take a lot of work. And I want to say to my Black and brown people, if you have the opportunity to get vaccinated, please get vaccinated. I'm still hearing people saying, "Well, I'm just going to wait. Well, I'm going to let other people get it first, and then I'm going to get it." And so this morning, I received a text that my son's grandmother, who I was very close to, she died due to complications related to COVID. And that was something that was totally preventable. You know, she had people around her been a little bit more responsible, she perhaps would not have gotten COVID to start with. But we have a vaccine, it works, it's effective. I got my second shot for my vaccine trial. We talked about in the past that me and my daughter are participating in the phase 3 trial for AstraZeneca, and we both have received our second shots. Neither one of us had shaking or swelling of the tongue or anything. We're both doing just fine. And I've seen some of the data related to that trial, and it's effective. You know, the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, they have efficacy rates of about 90%, and about 30% of the participants in the trials were non-white people. So we have representation in the trials. We have representation on the scientist side. Now we need to participate as consumers. If you can get the vaccine, please get the vaccine, because it is just awful when people get sick and, you know, have critical illnesses related to COVID, when we know that we have a way to prevent it from spreading. So hopeful for Biden. Really excited to see what he's going to do in the near future, and I think we'll get it done.
You know, we're going to continue talking about the vaccine in our upcoming town hall. So I want to encourage all of you who are watching to join us. We're here every other Wednesday on the African American Leadership Forum, broadcasting at the same time in the same place. And we do have multiple conversations coming up that are focused on the vaccine so that you can make an informed decision for you and your family. Before I wrap this thing up, I want to have Nick Muhammed go ahead and close us out. Where do we go from here?
I think the thing that I would look to see from this administration, I want us to finally bring Black people out of the shadows of the country. Let us stand up, own what happened to these people, to us, so that we don't have to have an asterisk by our American citizenship. And for too long, that has not happened. And I think if, you know, we really truly want to heal this country, the first thing that we got to do is acknowledge, you know, the people that they've wronged for centuries, since the inception. And the reality is we're not going to get anywhere until that is fully addressed, because that's in the back of everybody's mind at every single second of the day. And until that's done, until you do right at home, ain't nothing right gonna come, you know. So you gotta start at home. And that's just something that this new administration has a tremendous opportunity to do. And who better than Biden, who has his own checkered past when it comes to his view of uppity Negroes, right? He has more to prove than people, you know, care to discuss. But one of the biggest things that he can do to show that he actually has learned from his past, because his past is a part of, you know, what made this country what it is, to step up, to say, you know, I held some of those same views of Black people, not people of color, Black people. He stood in the halls of Congress and called us the N-word on public record. This is our reality. We got to stop shying away and hiding behind people. And my call is to anybody who calls themselves a friend of Black people. You should want to see us actually brought to our proper position in this country. Because if we're straight, guess what? Well, relatively, if we're okay, everybody in this country is okay, because we're the floor of this country, with the exception of my Native brothers and sisters whose land has been stolen. But the reality is, if you can continue to stomach the systematic oppression of Black people, anything that you think you're going to gain is built on sand. You won't have a rock bottom for the best of this country's potential to be unlocked until the floor of Black America is made firm, hold, and brought into the sunlight so that it can actually stand up and continue to demonstrate what makes this country great. But as long as they keep us at that floor, America will continue, in my opinion, to limp into the future, because we're not using all of our strengths that's at our disposal. And my focus is on Black people for that very reason. That's a 400-year boot on our neck that has not moved and has been passed from generation to generation. And that proverbial foot on our neck has been shared in part by other communities and communities of color in order to gain access to the American dream. I'm saying it's time for us to stand up. This time, don't rally everybody to keep us down. Show that you've learned from your past and correct that ongoing deep wrong that is always under the surface of any Black person who knows their history and any white person who knows the history of this country. Now is the time to prove that they actually have the political courage to do so. And we have a brief moment to do it. We got about 2 years before the quote unquote crazies, have an opportunity to come back in and reaffirm themselves. And make no mistake, they're not gone.
That's right.
They're still here. They're still growing. They got families and children just like we do. And they become more sophisticated just like we do. They win people over to their side and their perspective just like we do. And that all is unfortunately connected to Black success. The more we get closer to sustainability, being able to stand upright, some people are simply threatened because we are great, period. So for us to stand in greatness, even amongst some of our Democratic colleagues, it will cause them to say, we can't let them be too great. And the sad part about that is, as long as you can't let Black America be great, America will never be great.
There it is. There it is. I want to encourage our community to rest, but don't quit. We did the work, we mobilized, we got some elected officials into office, but the work is really just beginning now. It's up to us to hold these elected officials accountable, to put in place legislative and political agendas that benefit our communities. And the sky is the limit. We shouldn't feel afraid to ask for what we need and what we want. I think we've proven for 400 years, and America's indebted to us. And so we have an opportunity right now to shape our country into what it truly could be. And it's going to take the work of all of us collectively to do it. I want to thank the collective of panelists who have come together to make this town hall possible. You all are brilliant and have truly lifted my spirits. Please come back, each and every one of you. I want to also thank the collective working behind the scenes to make this town hall possible, our producers and community partners, our sponsors, the Minneapolis Foundation, North Point Health and Wellness, and Children's Minnesota, and of course, Insight News, North Point, the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder, Minnesota Community Care, and so many of you who are watching and viewing this at home, who are sharing, who are engaging. I saw some of the comments in the chat that we didn't get a chance to get to. Rest assured, we will talk more about COVID-19 and the vaccine in the coming town halls. In fact, our next town hall is February 10th, and unless something else crazy happens, we will be talking about the vaccine. I can't promise you because it's 2021 and things have been crazy since the beginning. But that's the plan for now. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off and just encourage you all to rest, but don't quit. The marathon continues. We have so much more work to do, and there's so much more good in this world that we all have access to. My name is Brittany L. Wright with Insight News. You all have a wonderful afternoon and week, and we will see you next time. Peace.